This is ogforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Paya. Paya offers Acumatica users a suite of industry-leading payment orchestration tools. Far beyond native Acumatica payments, Paya enables EMV NFC terminals for countersale. They offer a frictionless customer portal through their click-to-pay solution, and they support most e-commerce platforms and point-of-sale solutions used with Acumatica, such as One Retail and AcuPOS. And best of all, omni-channel reconciliation is available for all their solutions. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is Aldrich Web Solutions. Are you a distributor using Acumatica, yet struggling with an e-commerce fit? US-based Aldrich Web Solutions out of Marion, Illinois, has 2 decades of experience helping distributors find success online. Our team of experts built the integration, creating websites that work effortlessly with Acumatica. With our reputation for swift customer service and meticulous attention to detail, we are the perfect fit for distributors needing online solutions. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. I mean guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Friday, January 5th, 2024, and this is episode number 119, our first episode of 2024. You can find related links on the episode page at augforums.com/episode 119. Today we're talking with James McKinnon about modifying the standard replenishment behavior in Acumatica. Hey, James, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Now I am all nervous, realizing that, hey, I'm your first one for this year, and this is actually my first podcast ever as well.
Hey,
That's
well,
kind of funny
congratulations. I think
for
I've
both of
I've
us.
heard the I'm nervous a number of times, and usually by the end of it, it's like, oh, that wasn't too bad. So
Yeah, no,
we'll
I'm
be fine.
okay. Yeah, I have a tendency to speak in stories, and sometimes, as much as of an introvert as I am, sometimes it's difficult to have me stop talking.
Well, I'm similar. I'm also an introvert, and I'm very detail oriented, and that's what I like doing on this podcast. I like this longer format, uh, getting into the details. There's so much marketing gloss in this industry. It's nice to kind of get under the hood and talk
Keep it
details.
real.
Keep it real. There you go. I like that.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
hey,
So there.
before we get into it, I always like getting the brief origin story of all of our guests. So maybe you could tell us where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you got into the world of mid-market ERP.
Sure. So I'm very much, I guess you call it grassroots. My history starts in the world of computers like 45 years ago or more. I actually got into computers when I was 7. Um, Self-taught, learned how to code by the time I was 8, writing my own games. I was doing desktop publishing by the time I was 12, 3D modeling by the time I was 12. I continued to program, did a little bit of assembly, all kinds of different languages and databases. I did my first database by the age of 14. So if you can appreciate, that was 40 years ago. Um, I've been involved in computers heavily, very organic. I literally have no formal education, so I'm self-taught with all this stuff. Uh, in terms of getting into ERPs, um, I started working at Flags Unlimited roughly 26, 27 years ago. It's been one heck of a roller coaster ride. I always follow up with, thank goodness I like roller coasters. I started there in graphics, started from scratch, uh, managed graphics for roughly 20 years. But through that whole process, I was also heavily involved in production, color management, printing, quality control. Um, I actually built the system along with a couple other key individuals within our business to manage all of our manufacturing needs. So not bills and materials, but uh, all the various operations, timings, quality control, coordination, all that kind of stuff. And we had actually gone through 2 different implementations, one being Lilly Manufacturing, another being Cost Manufacturing, and unfortunately, neither of those really fit our needs. So I actually built one from scratch, and it's worked very well. But of course, it was missing that key component of inventory. It did manage some, but it was very select pieces. In terms of getting into ERP, shortly after I started at Flags, I was tossed the opportunity to deal with all of the IT needs, and so that was wonderful. Um, Learning about things like Maximizer, Sage ERP, and actually back then it was literally ACPAC for DOS. Um, Went through various iterations. I didn't have a whole lot to do with the setup itself, but I had a lot to do with the management of the databases, the users, access, building custom reports outside of the platform. Things like that, kind of like piecing things together. So I'm very much of the type of person that sees problems and connects them one way or another. And sometimes they may seem to be a little unique, but you know what, in the end, it works, and it works very well, and the solutions always end up serving their purpose quite well. And what's interesting is part of the reason why we're having this podcast or this chat is because some of the ideas that I've presented, or some of the needs that I've presented on your forum. For example, the idea of having uh, the automated replenishment being limited, like limiting its scope so it doesn't look at every single order out in the future, and there's a bit of a gate that is set. We actually had to do that for our older system as well, and once we had done that, it worked beautifully. So it's curious to me as a homebrewed coder scripter, why, and this is where I tend to go, why isn't that a normal feature? Why isn't typical for a system to have these opportunities to be user managed, so you can have a gate for automated replenishment and say, hey, for example, in this warehouse under these conditions, here's the criteria, set the criteria, and have a gate of 1 day or 1 week or 5 hours or. So for me, um, those kind of things seem obvious. And what's funny is, this is supposed to be a bit of an origin story, I guess. That's the way I approach a lot of things, because I have this inkling into, well, that stuff just makes sense. And even back, well, I'm self-taught with all this stuff. I did go through a wonderful experience where I was learning how to use Alias Power Animator. For those of you who know, that was the software used to render out Jurassic Park and Terminator 2. Ace that, did wonderful, but what was really cool was being exposed to other technologies. And so there's, I believe it's called the McLuhan Center. Um, and there is this recognition of some of my norms by people who actually knew what they were doing. Because, of course, I was young at that time, right? Just coming from a tiny city or tiny town of like 15,000 people. Um, and I almost landed myself a job being basically a permanent beta tester for that application, for that platform. Uh, for again, for those who can link into or who can look back, today that is known as Maya, um, one of the leading 3D modelers. So I was on the cusp of being hired to be like a permanent beta tester for that entire suite, which was really cool. So it's just a bit of a stroke of my own ego personally at that age, which was really healthy for me. Um, but it's kind of like confirmation that, yeah, you know what, like I am just looking for those things that make life easier for everybody and common users. Why make it painful? And that was one of the other appreciations that I learned when I was younger, is that all these things that look simple, they're simple on the surface because so many other people have put in so much energy to make it look like that. So when you find an application, a solution that actually works simplistically, it's probably insanely complicated on the background, and be very thankful for that. Be thankful that you've stumbled across that solution. So I've got like a whole mishmash of stuff. Never mind the fact that, used to play in a jazz band and used to build custom homes as a teenager and so forth. So I'm fairly rounded kind of idea. Anyway, enough about me on that. Hopefully that
Oh,
paints a
I love
picture.
it. I think the eclectic combination of skills background I think is common to those who wind up being an ERP because it does require a combination of skills. It's not a narrow focus, right? So I love the
Hmm.
background, and I'm looking forward even more to talking about your replenish situation. I think you might have said it already, but I think you're in Ontario, Canada. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Flags Unlimited, you've been there, would you say,
Yeah, I've
was it
been
like
there
over 20 years?
26, 27 years. I'm
Okay.
referred to as a lifer. I'm very
Okay.
comfortable. I'm very happy. And I remember being told by other peers way back in the day prior to the job, when you're in IT, you're only at a job for 2 to 3 years. You've either fixed all the problems or they're not listening. I've been really lucky. This place, we just continue to evolve. It's like nonstop. So yeah, you solve all the problems. Well, guess what? Basic idea of lean manufacturing, that's not where it ends. Now you look for the next problem, you anticipate the next problem, and you look ahead as far as you can reasonably and plan for the future. And that is, we are constantly in that state. So I feel very, very fortunate, very lucky for having come across this opportunity to work at Flags Unlimited. And it's been an absolute blast, just like a roller coaster ride, right? Yeah, it's had ups and downs, but man, those have been pretty cool. Very exciting.
That that sounds like a lot of fun. And so you're live on Acumatica now, and
Yeah.
just not on replenishment, or where are you at in that process?
Yeah. So within Acumatica itself and that whole landscape, if you will, we had we'll call it an entertaining deployment at the beginning. Um, and it's taken quite some time. I think I apologize for my memory, but I think we've been live for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. Year and a half, definitely with the entire business. So we lean on the idea of a staggered deployment, right? So we would get certain aspects of the solution up and running. And for those who are interested, we're using Acumatica Manufacturing Edition. Um, for a while, we had access to the advanced planning and scheduling because that's something we anticipated we would need. But because everything else was taking so long to deploy, we just gave up on that for the time, and we decided to focus on other things. And that's kind of where we landed now. So what's happened now is, sales is live, finance is live. And now I'm having fun, and I'm sorry, but I do actually enjoy looking at things like replenishment of goods. I have diced up our business into various warehouses, recognizing the benefits of doing that. While we're one physical geographical location, people got to remember that things like warehouses are nothing more than an organizational unit. They come along with extras. Well, okay, so how are we going to leverage those extras? And so we actually stumbled across an awesome opportunity, because we have chopped up our one business, our one geographical location, into about 6 or 7 warehouses. Um, and that's where we get into the whole replenishment thing. We deal with MRP replenishment or MRP driven replenishment, and then we deal with what I'm calling automated replenishment. Right, more of the typical stuff. You set it up on a schedule to run maybe once a day. It looks at inventory, min maxes of a particular warehouse, and away you go. So we have actually deployed that. I set up our retail store as its own warehouse, and it typically replenishes from our shipping warehouse. So our shipping warehouse, we affectionately call it a cage because it is. Um, it's got a door at both ends, and so product comes in one door and literally goes out the other door, and there's stock stuff and there's custom stuff and so forth. And so for the retail store, they actually replenish from there because they want onesies twosies, right? There's not a lot of volume in terms of each individual item. There's just a lot of items, like a lot of distinct items. So by setting up as a warehouse, I was able to set up a little nightly script that says, hey, evaluate the replenishment requirements for the retail store, retail warehouse on a nightly basis. And of course, generate that sales order of a transfer type um, when it's deemed appropriate. And then the next morning, shipping department walks in. They go, "Oh, look at that! We've got like 8 different items we have to put on a trolley and shuffle on up to the retail store." Done. So because of the way we set that up, I was able to take what was historically a little time consuming to manage the inventory within the retail store. It was being done manually. Like the maintenance of it was being done manually. It was problematic because if we had people off on holidays, sometimes the cross training didn't happen the way we need to, and that's tough to expect for some people. So this kind of just washed it all away and made it really, really nice, right? So that worked beautifully. And so then what
Can I
we're
ask you on your script? So you
sure,
mentioned you put together a script. Is that you
sorry,
mentioned, and I should mention, I'm going to put a link to your post in the forum in case anyone wants to chime in on this. But you
sure,
mentioned 3 challenges. I think we can skip the first one. In challenge 2, though, you mentioned that you threw together a customization project with the help of ChatGPT. Are you talking
yeah.
about that
So
script, or is this a different script?
while I tend to talk in terms of scripts, I apologize. Like 99% of what I do is scripting when it comes to this kind of stuff. What I was talking about was the automated replenishment and having the automation scheduled to execute, all within Acumatica, nothing fancy, right? Just a different approach. That's all. But then what happened was we were going, okay, that works really, really well. Now let's work on the ship department. So in my head, having all these different warehouses, it made a lot of sense to work it in reverse. So the final output was retail. So the next output down the chain would be the shipping department. And then from after the shipping department, we would then work on finished goods. And after finished goods, we would then work on raw goods. So at each and every one of those warehouses, there are significant differences in the product as they exist. So now what we're looking at is the shipping department, and this is where we get into the post. Um, so there's a lot of product that we can say, okay, we need these items moved from finished goods into the shipping department. You can think of each of these like finished goods is where you would keep full boxes. So we happen to have 40 flags in a box. So that area is full of boxes with 40 flags in them, just for the sake of conversation. Um, so we would pull a full box from finished goods and replenish it into the shipping department as a full box. Whereas retail needs onesies and twosies. Well, the shipping department lives on onesies and twosies. There's always open boxes. So that works out really, really well. So what we ran into, the difficulty was that when evaluating the replenishment needs for the shipping department, all of our orders, now let's see if I stumble across a solution here, all of our orders are shipped through the shipping department. So we have a team of salespeople, and they process orders on a regular basis, and they're always shipping from the ship warehouse. Makes sense to us. It's the way we've always done it, regardless of what ERP system we've done or we've used. It's just kind of like there because that's how we do it. There may, however, be a better way, and let's see if we stumble across something. Um, and so what was happening was when we would replenish, um, the system looks ahead at all orders. Okay.
Well,
Well,
let me back you up to challenge one because I think you're getting to challenge three. Let's go ahead and
oh,
go back to
okay.
challenge one. Since you mentioned the 40 flags in the box, let's go ahead and cover that ground. So,
Right.
um, you only, I think, wanted to replenish the shipping warehouse with boxes of 40 flags in them, right?
As an example. Right. So I apologize. As much as
So
I may
get,
have prepared for this, I didn't look at my post
oh,
from
no
back
problem.
then.
I've got it up.
So
I'll
yeah.
keep you on track.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Keep me
Give me
honest here.
the lay of the land for your
Okay.
company. Like, what's
So
the base unit of measure and what's the
unit of
sales unit of
measures.
measure?
That's
Yeah.
the key. Okay. So what I came to find was, and this was one of those moments where it's like, well, why doesn't it have one of these solutions? Like that just makes sense to me. Insert head bobble. Um, and what I'm looking for is the ability, just like you have a base unit of measure, I want to, and we have a purchase or unit of measure, and we have a sales order, or yeah, sales unit of measure. I want to see a unit of measure that is set, um, and is sensitive to the warehouse. So I want to be able to say, uh, warehouse one and warehouse two. When a transfer occurs there, I want to use a different unit of measure. In that case, if you think of finished goods to the shipping department, I want a box. And just like Acumatica asks, it's like, well, okay, you got to define the box, you got to put in how many widgets are going in there. Okay, fine. So one item might have a box of 40 widgets, another uh, item may be a box of 3 widgets, whatever it is. But at least if you were able to do that so it was sensitive to the warehouse, then it would be easy peasy lemon squeezy. Like it would be so awesome. And in my head I'm going, well, that seems obvious. Why don't we have that? Again, insert head
So
bobble.
what setup did you go? Your base unit of measure, is it a flag or is it a
So
box
the
of 40
base,
flags?
yeah, that was a struggle for us at the beginning, and we've recently, like as of maybe 3 or 4 months ago, appreciated that. Yeah, you know what, the base unit measure needs to be the smallest unit measure that's viable. So in terms of finished goods, they end up being eaches, right?
So individual flags.
Yes.
Okay. So
Okay.
then your
So
problem is replenishment might suggest a transfer of 32 flags, which is not a
right,
full block, not a full
right,
box. Is that the problem?
correct.
And then so
So
you want a way to tell it that I'm only allowed to transfer in blocks of 40, for example,
correct.
for that
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
particular warehouse, not for the retail
And for
warehouse. The
that item,
retail could take 32 and for that
if
item.
yes, yeah, yeah. So it would be context has to be sensitive to uh, the source warehouse, or I guess it's the replenishment warehouse, and the warehouse that it's destined to be into, and the item. Okay, so it would be really, really easy. You would have a table. One identifies the source, one identifies the destination, one identifies the item, and another field would identify the unit of measure, right? And then, of course, you'd have the unit of measure conversion in there. So it's really not rocket science, at least in my head. And appreciate I'm looking at it both from the perspective of database. I say both as in two, but there's so many from the database structure, okay, as well as the application itself, as well as the practical use side. To be able to manage it, that would be perfect. Like 3 or 4 columns of data in a matrix or in a grid, and you just populate it. And so when those conditions exist, that's a unit measure that is utilized, and things are converted accordingly. And you could
And
maybe
then if
throw in another
nothing's in
field that says
there for
round
that
up or round down.
combination, you could roll back to the default. If if
If
nothing's in there, right?
or let it throw an error. It depends on the approach,
Sure.
right? If you choose, like I have zero issues with the system throwing an error because it tells me I did something wrong. It's part of the reason why I like computers so much. Um, and so, as an ISV, yeah, okay, maybe you don't want to do that. You'd want to have it captured. You want to have a failback or a catch-all. So in the event that that criteria doesn't match, then it goes to base unit of measure if that's what's appropriate. However, it gets even more difficult when you get into materials and you start looking at bills of materials, um, because you're going to have fractional units. You're going to have, like, it gets really, really messy very, very quick. And we're actually going through this right now because we've kind of put this part on pause and moved into the MRP realm. But I'm going to put a pin in that because I know we want to stick with, hopefully, the 3 points that I raised. So if memory serves me
Yeah, let's stay on the
correctly,
replenishment side. So
yeah,
I,
yeah, yeah.
and I'll say this, that I know that Acumatica's replenishment solution is uh
Not terribly
beginner at
robust.
best. Yeah, yeah, it's very beginner, right? Or yeah, it's not robust. And I feel, and I was intrigued by your post because I've run into this a number of times, and I don't have like a huge population of examples, but my gut feel is that there's the out of the box replenishment, there's the ISV solutions like NetStock, and then there's this middle ground that I think you're in, and I think a lot of people are in, where it's like, you know what, it's got some stuff here. If I could just tweak it, how do I
Yeah,
tweak it?
it's
And I
like
feel like that's where you're
95%
at,
there.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like, why do I have to go to a full blown ISV solution? I should be able to do this with the core ERP, right? And so
Yes.
that's why I'm really fascinated to just hear your story and where you're at
Well,
now and how you arrived there. So yeah,
so there
let's
is.
leave the MRP out and
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
just stay on the
Well,
40 flags in a box. So like, how are you solving the 40 flags in the box challenge now?
okay. Well, that actually leads partly through the 3 points because I think the next point, if I remember correctly, had something to do with giving certain people access to the sales order module
Oh, here, I'll read
in
it to you.
in
I got it.
specific
I'll read it
conditions.
for
So
the
have
audience
at it.
too.
Have
So
at it.
here, so we were talking about challenge one. I won't read that one. Challenge two. A short-term solution to challenge one is to allow our logistics team to edit the TR sales orders, which are transfer orders, with a level of control so they can modify the quantities up or down based on the quantities divisible by the unit of measures not available in challenge one. So the 40 flags in the box, they could only do 40, 80, 120, etc.
Right.
Here's where you said you created your first code-based customization project with the help of the latest chat GPT, and it works
Yep.
like a charm and even makes
Yep.
sense.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
still working?
Yeah. Now it's not
Okay.
live. It's not live. Okay, but
Okay.
we've got it in a sandbox that I deployed internally. It works like a charm. There's a few other things I got to learn. Like apparently I've got two customizations that both extend the same. Uh, what's it called? Not the namespace, the DAC. I think it is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, right. And you can't. You can only have one. Okay, well that was a boo boo on my part. No problem. But in terms of that actually working, yeah, it worked like a charm. I had created, because I would imagine some of the entertainment is actually the leveraging of ChatGPT. So what was really nice is the timing of all this stuff. And so I created my own ChatGPT agent or whatever you call it. I loaded up all the Acumatica supplied documentation on customization projects into my own agent and said, okay, now this is what I want to do. Like BQL is tough for me. I can do SQL no problem. BQL is where it started. It's like, oh my goodness, I have to go out and like chat with Mr. or Mrs. Chat GPT and figure this stuff out. So that's where it started. So it rewrote the B query or BQL, um, and then I traversed into this intermediate step. So the BQL part was actually uh, being able to limit or putting in a gate right for that query, for the time frame. But that's what got me into it a little further. It's like, you know what? I got to think about this different. We're really big on trying to control access. It's not that we don't trust people, it's that, we're human, we make mistakes. It's really simple. So if we can mitigate those opportunities for mistakes, then why wouldn't we? So it's like, okay, fine. So I'm going to create a role, or sorry, yeah, I'm going to create a role called X. And if someone has that role, then they're automatically allowed to get into the sales order module, but they're only allowed to edit sales orders of a TR type. And like 6 lines of code later, that's all it was. It worked like a charm. It's like, oh, this is beautiful. This is what I want. So that is, I think that's the key that you might be trying to get at, or I interpret it as such, where it's like, you know what, you don't need a full blown ISV. And no, it's not available right out of the box. But Acumatica, one of the big selling points for me with Acumatica was I was told it was effectively a development platform in the very, very beginning, and then grew up and they decided to make an ERP. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's the story I was told. And I take a look at that whole customization module and it's like, this is cool. I really like this. My head doesn't do um, object oriented programming so well. I tend to do scripting. There's a bit of a different mindset, but that's okay. I'll get through that. But like seriously, I could read those 6 lines of code and make sense of it. It's like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. This is exactly what I'm looking for. I went in and I manually tweaked it, and this is the code directly from ChatGPT. Okay, I grabbed it, plopped it in, made and it did technically work right off the bat. But I wanted to make a few little tweaks, change some of the BQL that was in it. Yeah, it works like a charm. It's awesome. Not exactly the
So,
greatest approach for the overall solution, but as an interim solution, yeah, it knocks it out of the park.
so security wise, you restricted them to only be able to edit TR sales orders. What about at the
Correct.
quantity level? Did you actually get it to only allow them to go 40, 80,
No,
120,
so
etc.?
no, that's all human intervention, unfortunately. Um,
Okay.
but the people who are managing it would normally manage it anyway, so they're already very well in tune with what things should be. So we're kind of lucky that way. Um, but that's good for right now. The difficulty comes, well, what happens when the primary team lead for the logistics area is off on holidays and their right hand person is off on holidays, or sick? Like, of course, Murphy's Law is always going to prevail. And we've got someone who's in there part time and then just someone from another department just helping as literally an extra set of hands. Oh, that's not a great situation to be in, right? And it's those are the moments that we're really trying to help mitigate, help support them properly, make sure the security is reasonable and so forth, and the systems are viable. And so that's why ideally we would want to be able to explicitly identify the from, the to warehouse, the preferred unit of measure, um, maybe a couple other fields, round up, round down, whatever, and then that would just take care of it itself, right? Wipe your
So
hands
can I
clean.
ask on the sales unit measure? So it sounds like your base unit of measure is a flag, not a
Yep,
box of 40 flags. Your sales unit of measure, that must also be a flag, correct?
correct.
And you can't make that a box of 40 flags because of the retail situation. Is that why?
Well, no, because we have a whole, well, in part because of that, but we also have a whole sales department selling these flags out of the shipping department,
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, most
right?
people are not just buying, well,
They're not
I
going to
don't know your
buy
business,
40
but
flags just
I
because
wouldn't
that's
buy
how we
40
want to
flags.
sell
I'd
it.
probably buy one.
Darn.
So that makes sense. And so you don't have another gear to tweak there. I guess that, and that's
Correct.
your point
And
about why you need another table.
to be fair, even if it wasn't as fancy as identifying the various warehouses, and then, even if it wasn't that fancy, even if you had a transfer unit of measure, so you would at least know that all transfers would use a box or a bag
There
or,
you go.
whatever. Like that would be in its simplest form. Um, and so, we go back to, well, I know how to add a field now. I can get it to store the data. But I don't know how to tie in the automated replenishment and the evaluation process. And that's where I was getting into. I started like just scratching the surface with looking at the gate of that whole process because it is a big process. And of course, we almost have this is the difficult part where you kind of start going from homebrewed, internally developed solution to, oh, darn, maybe I need an ISV. I really hope not, or hire somebody to make a customization. I would really rather not do that, right? Like if I can write code that's
Sure.
maybe 20 lines long and call it a day and document the heck out of it, we're all good with that, right?
Right.
But this
Yeah, there's a
process
line you
is kind of
cross.
complicated.
It's a gray
Yeah,
line, but yeah, you kind of have a gut feel of when you cross the line. You're like, oh,
exactly.
okay, I just rewrote the thing. Yeah, you don't want
Yeah,
to do
you don't
that.
want to do that. No, no, no.
Well,
Right.
so let me go to challenge three because this was the most intriguing part to me. We've kind of worked our way up to it. You mind if I read your
Oh,
challenge three
absolutely,
paragraph?
because I don't remember what it
All
was.
right, here it
My
goes.
memory's toast. Yeah.
All right, challenge three: restricting the scope of the evaluated transactions that the prepare replenishment screen considers while rendering the results. The problem
Yes.
here is that we have orders in our system that could have ship dates well into the future. If we don't limit the scope, then the items necessary to fulfill these orders will sit in shipping for months. This isn't at all practical. We figure a
Right.
reasonable option would be to limit the system scope to include those transactions that are no more than 1 week into the future. So basically, only look at sales orders with dates that are 1 week into the future, right? That's the
Right.
fence you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So just like in MRP, there are two different gates, two different fences that you can define, um, and that's pretty much what I'm looking for or would like to do. For ourselves, we've done this long enough. We know that 1 week can work very well, um, and we could actually go a little shorter. So people might say, well, what about those really big orders that take more than a week to prepare? We already know about those orders because for us, in the context of our business, when there's a big order, the whole business knows about it. Okay. And we're all thrilled to have those orders, and it's all hands on deck. Let's make sure this order gets out. So those are already well in the, being processed. Everybody's in the know. Everything's cool. And shipping or logistics, they're all involved at all the various stages, right? So we don't have to worry about those. Those will show up, and they'll be like an entire 40-foot trailer full of flags to go out, and you know for shipping to know about that 2 days in advance is fine because the rest of the company's been working on it and they've been hearing about it. So for us, we could literally just hard code it into, say, pick a number, 5 business days out, whatever. Bob's your uncle. Everybody's happy. We already know that works because we've been doing that for years and years and years in Sage, which was our previous system. And oddly enough, we had a customization built for that, and that's exactly what it did. It presented two dates, one being the start date, one being the end date. Uh, the start date was today. The end date was like 2 or 3 days out, and that was the default. And you could go in and override that anytime if you wanted to look ahead even further, because that impacts what, in that particular case, that was impacting what was being printed in terms of picking slips. It's the same concept, though. What we're doing is we're creating, instead of picking slips, we're creating transfer orders that are going to transfer all the goods. So, when you get an order coming in, that's for, you know, 400,000 flags. You don't want that sitting there for the next 3 months, because that order's date is 3 months out. And so that would be associated with that warehouse, and that's a problem. Um, it picks the picking slip and all that stuff, and it just causes more grief than it's worth. So by having the fence in there, it helps us really focus on what's important. And the reality is, in that scope, what's important is today. And you know appreciating that this is replenishment, not just shipments, today plus a few days.
So that makes sense. Yeah. So you just want to restrict the population of sales orders that is looking at essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I should I should throw in here because you've mentioned MRP a couple times. I should throw in here, and here's where I'm not prepared. I wish I could remember the details of a conversation I had with Debbie Baldwin on this podcast, which was not that many episodes ago. Give me 5 seconds to look it up here. Let's see. Episode 114. I will link to that on this episode as well. But we talked about changes that are coming in Acumatica 2024 R1, where, if I remember correctly, and I'm actually pulling up the 2024 R1 release notes, like the preview version of them right now as I'm talking this through. I believe they're renaming the whole thing to inventory planning. So that a problem right
Yeah,
now is you have
that makes sense.
MRP and you have replenishment, right? And they're
Yeah.
like two different worlds. I think they're trying to combine the two. And then I don't remember the details of how they're going to do it from a SKU standpoint, right? You have to be licensed for this or that. But
Hmm.
I think that's part of the challenge right now is that there's almost two different replenishments that you can use. There's the MRP version and there's the regular version, right? So I don't think we want to go too far into what used to be called MRP, what I think is now called inventory planning, because I think you're going to have the same problem either way, right? So I just
It's
thought I'd
no
throw
see
that in
MR.
there.
Yeah, but MRP. Um, now I'm only using the forecasting right now, the manually entered forecasting right now. MRP you can actually set a gate already, so it already. But
Okay,
the gate doesn't work the same way that I would like it to, though. But that's okay. Point is they've already got a mechanism in there to kind of help address that already, right? Um,
gotcha.
I
Okay,
haven't considered using MRP yet to replenish other warehouses. I'm the automated warehouse just works so easily. I think that's what's nice about it. It's like, you know what? It's not complicated. You got mins and maxes. You run your evaluation. You run the process once a night or whatever, and it works great. So let's just tack on a few extra little fields or conditions and really make that a much more robust thing. The other thing that I think is awkward, and I'll throw out the flag with it being awkward, is appreciating. And we're going to sound a little political, or I might, this is a software, it's an offering, it's a solution, is a solution, and is turned into an entire, what do you call it? Like, it's more than just a platform. There's a whole world of applications. So it's kind of like picking on Microsoft. You can't pick on them too much. You can't expect Microsoft to do absolutely everything, though they seem to be trying to. Um, they are a platform for other businesses. So what's difficult is, if we'll stick with the Microsoft example, if they create too much and do too good of a job, they're now pilfering, or they're now putting in jeopardy that platform that they've created for other businesses to exist. So I don't know if they think like that at Acumatica. I don't know if they go, well, you know what, we'll give you like 40% of the solution, and that's going to work for 60% of the people. Okay, and then all those other people, that's what that whole environment is for. That's a whole other area, that marketplace and everything. I don't know if they look at that. I don't know if they want to solve the problem 100%.
in my
Is
experience, Acumatica does function a lot like Microsoft in that Microsoft is good at building tools or parts of an engine. They don't really build the car, right? But they give you the pieces so you can assemble exactly what you're looking for. And
right,
Acumatica, in my opinion, their philosophy is the same in that they build a lot of tools, and that makes your job easier to build the finished product. If they try to build a finished product that fit everyone, number one, it's impossible. And number
yeah,
two, if you were to
agree,
do that, you become like an SAP where you have to then adopt SAP's way of doing it, right? And
right,
you're now like a tier $1 billion company solution, whereas Acumatica is settled in the mid market. And
right.
so I think that's very common for a mid market ERP solution that it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, although particularly in the area of replenishment. Acumatica is weak. Like, especially if you compare it to a mid-market Infor product, which is tailored to distribution companies, they build out a lot more in their replenishment solution than Acumatica has, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, there is some middle ground, right? But I think even if the MRP helps with defense, you made the point, you're still going to need to tweak it, right? And so
Yeah.
what got me interested in your challenge 3 specifically is, I think essentially at the end of the day, you you land on the prepare replenishment screen, right?
Hmm.
And once you run replenishment, really the functional screen that someone's going to interact with, because prepare replenishment, you're just going to schedule it, right? It's going to
Yep.
automatically run. What do you run it nightly or a couple times a
Yeah.
day?
Every night, 6 o'clock. It's
Every
good
night.
enough.
So
Yeah.
that you don't even need a screen for, right? It's just something that happens. I don't care about it.
Yep.
Really, the one that I think you care most about is either the create purchase orders or create transfer order screen.
The oh yeah, now I'm trying to crack off some rust because it's been a little while since I looked at the individual screens. I think there's like three different steps to the process. So the evaluation itself, that initial prepare replenishment, I believe that is where I found the BQL that reaches out to evaluate the demand of the orders, among other things. And so that's why I landed there, right? It's like, oh, if only I could put a where clause in that BQL that limits the date range,
Gotcha.
right? So
But and
that's why I
actually,
went there.
I just realized you said earlier that you wanted the transfers created automatically,
Yeah,
so they're
and we
just
do
sitting
that.
there.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
then my other screens I was mentioning are irrelevant for you because it's just going to run and it's going to appear the transaction, so none of that matters.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you're just looking to tweak the replenishment part and put a fence on it. The problem is, even though it might only be 1 or 2 lines of code, it's the question of having the skill of where to put those 1 or 2 lines of code, right?
Yeah. And when you get into that area, like I kind of do that. I've already written algorithms similar to that with our internal scheduling system. It's a system that is based on capacity planning, right? So a widget takes 3 hours. You've got 8 hours worth of capacity. Where does it get scheduled? So the system already does that, does those evaluations, deals with priority, all that kind of stuff. So I'm quite familiar with the concepts and with the general approach. And so I could recognize the BQL within those DACs. And I apologize. It's not called a DAC. What's the other organizational unit where all the
I
code
think
lies?
the business
Graph.
logic,
It's the
the
graph.
graph. Yeah,
Yeah.
graph.
So it lands within the graph, and I saw it. It's like that's exactly it. And you can see the functions, or I call them functions. I'm like old school simple. I can see the functions that are being called, and I can see that every time it goes out there. I think there's two different functions that are called, uh, and it's you can read the BQL, and it says, yeah, it's going out. It's evaluating sales orders, and it's ignoring quotes or something to that effect. Um, and I just want to put a where clause on at the end, right? But the point that I'm trying to make is that when you get into that part, when you get into the graph, some graphs could be very small and very obvious. It's like, oh well, I'm just going to add this in here. Done. Bob's your uncle. Except in this particular case, I actually want to replace it, and I don't have that skill set yet because I'm so new at dealing with customization projects. Um, and that that kind of bugs me. Um, and I don't know if we want to go off on that tangent, but we're talking about other people that may be in a similar situation as myself or as ourselves. And this stuff needs to be accessible, quite frankly. Uh, having really good practical examples, and I think you've probably seen that through some of my other posts, where it's like, oh, hasn't somebody done this before? Like, this can't be that hard. I know the concepts. I might not know the names, whatever. I know the concept. I know the business logic that needs to be executed. I can see it here. I'm like, I can see the finish line, right? But the people who can get you over that finish line, most of the people that I've communicated with, um, are very protective of the ability to cross that finish line. And I think that's very unfortunate. I can appreciate their perspective, But I always go back to an old story, an old scenario. I don't know, like we're probably close to the same age. Do you remember Doom and Duke Nukem and stuff like that?
Those, yeah, I
On
know
in
those video games.
DOS,
Yeah,
right? On
yeah.
DOS. Um, you know, id, the makers of Doom, uh, would give you 99 levels for free, and if you wanted the last level you had to pay for it, and everything, those 99 levels were also open source, like the whole system was open source, and they actually encouraged people to write and collaborate, and they had this massive website where you could go and you can literally see everybody's code and you can interact and talk, and wow, what a massive environment, all nurturing, all educational, all sharing all that information. And then you had their competition, which I think was actually Quake. It was closed, if I remember correctly. You got like maybe the first three levels out of 100, very different. And in my head, in my heart, I don't know if I'm technically correct, um, but I believe it won out. Like, how many Doom games do you see these days? I'm still a gamer, okay? So I see a lot of Doom variants of Doom. I don't see a whole lot of variants of Quake. Okay, so all these years later, Doom is still going strong, and I believe that it's because it had this culture, this way of existing, where yeah, like it was so nurturing, it was so awesome. I see so much positive about Acumatica. The platform itself is quite exciting for me, if you haven't picked up on that. Um, but there's those little nuggets, and I just wish that more of it was more open, more inviting, more supportive. And that's what I look forward to find in both communities, both in your community and the Acumatica community that they started up. But it's really hard to find that. And I think I might be wrong, but I think it's because a lot of these people who are doing this hard, high end stuff are being very protective of that knowledge base. Whereas myself, dealing with all the things that I have, I've literally traveled the world dealing with printing, color management, hardware, all that kind of stuff. And you know what the most amazing experience is when you're doing that and you're talking from people from other countries. Most amazing part is when you're talking shop with another tech. It does not matter what part of the world they come from. A tech is a tech is a tech. And we all love to share stories, and we all love to hear those stories and just share those experiences and that information. And I'm struggling to find that in the Acumatica community on a technical
Interesting.
level,
So
right?
I've got to
Maybe I
ask
just
you.
haven't connected with the right people or not. I don't know, but it's definitely different.
I got to ask you. Are you signed up for the Acumatica Summit at the end of the month,
I I have
or have
not
you ever
signed
gone
up
to
for.
one?
No, I'll admit, you guys can laugh at me if you want. I'm a little shy to travel these days. I used to go all over the world. I would go to China. We actually opened a facility in China that I helped out a lot with. And I would travel. I've been to China like 25, 30 times. No problem. Today, I hesitate to cross the border into the US. Okay. It's all in my head. I know. Um, I'm just really paranoid. And when it comes to, I also was a health and safety person for a very long time. Um, you know, the little thing that kind of sets me apart, I think, is, my 102-year-old grandmother's still kicking, and I don't want to catch a cold and not be able to visit with her.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, no, no problem. No, I get it. You don't need to explain
So
that. I'm
that's
closer to
kind of
your
where I come from.
extreme than the average person, so I get it there.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
reason
Yeah.
why I ask is, I haven't even checked what the deal is this year, because I know Mark Frakes, who used to organize the thing, is no longer at Acumatica,
Oh,
but they
yeah.
used to do every year, and might maybe are doing it again this year. Something they used to do a hackathon at the summit, and
Yes. I love that
that was
concept.
really useful to be able to talk tech to tech, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
And the flavor I've picked up, the reason why I got into the Acumatica product 10 years ago at this point was because of exactly that culture that you're talking about with the Doom video game. I wasn't
Yeah.
aware of those details, but yeah, the openness of it. I think even a lot of people mistake Acumatica for being open source. It's not, but it's pretty close to it. And it's not like an Udo where it's totally open, but it's
We
it's
looked at
pretty
that.
close.
Yep.
And so I, I I feel like that culture is there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear your experience that you haven't quite found that yet online. In my experience, it
I
is
might not
that
have
way.
found the right people yet,
Yeah, maybe.
right?
So in my experience, it is that way. What I still am not sure about, and this is why I was curious to pick your brain on your experience, is specifically with replenishment, how open it is, right? I don't know how much of a black box it is. So it sounds like you went in
Yeah.
through, you found the functions. I've gone through this path myself, but it was years ago. And I'm like, even if I could figure out where to tweak it, I'm nervous about tweaking it
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because of upgrades, right?
Yes.
I don't want to break my upgrades, right? It's like if you're going to perform surgery on something that's really like if I'm just going to remove a growth on the skin, that's kind of gross, sorry, but that's a different story than like I need to go change something in the heart, right?
Yes.
Because it's just way more dangerous. You really better know what you're doing. And the replenishment engine feels more like heart surgery to me.
It's on the
Could be
verge of.
wrong,
Yeah. Agree.
but
No, I
that's
agree.
right. That
Yeah.
and so it's like, is it an issue with the actual code, or is it just a problem with our understanding? Could it be made more tweakable? I don't know. But I've run into this before, and that's why I was curious to hear your experience. Sounds like we've kind of landed in similar spots where it's like we want to tweak it, but we're afraid to.
Yeah.
Is that where you're at?
Um, I'm very, very sensitive to that. Uh, and I usually have a decent idea of when I'm about to break something, and I evaluate. Is this going to be a fun breakage? Because who doesn't like to break glass? But can you recover from it, right? And that's usually what goes through my head. If I don't think I'm going to be able to recover from this, if I don't think that upgrades are going to happen, and I'm just making things more complicated, then no, this is not the right approach. And frankly, that even applies to the concept of hiring somebody to make a customization package. There are some things that I'm quite comfortable, like if I'm going to make a new screen, new functionality from scratch, that's one thing, right? That's my bag, that's my thing, that's my problem. But when you are taking something that already exists and virtually doing heart surgery, it's a great acknowledge or analogy. Yeah, maybe this isn't such a great idea. So what's another approach? And I
Right.
guess that's where I go. Look, don't ever think that I'm bashing Acumatica at all. I think it's an amazing solution, and I think I get some of the reasons why they do some of the things, and I can even appreciate some of the problems that we've encountered, because the reality is they got to make a solution, and that solution may not work for you or I, but it might work for 10 other people, right? So it's not like they're not doing their job. They are doing their job. We're just a little extra special, I guess. But are we really that special? And I think that's where I'd like to see Acumatica go, you know what? This system does work, but for the other 10% or half of those 10%, here's something that gets you a little closer. Like have a gate or yeah, have a line in the sand, whatever analogy you want to pick, that sets the date for how far out it looks. Like the reality is from my perspective, anytime I write any code, SQL, whatever, I always have certain gates, time being one of them, or dates. That's just inevitable. You might not present it in your query initially, but inevitably somebody's going to say, oh, well, this is a great report, but can you do it for last month? Well, that's a time gate in essence. And so I always facilitate those, even if I don't present them initially, right? And so that's kind of in my head. It's like, that seems like a no brainer for me. And if it seems like a no brainer for me, why didn't they do it? Now, I don't know if that's a little egotistical or whatever, but that's kind of the way I look at this stuff, right?
And maybe, with the combining of MRP and replenishment in 24R1, or at least starting that direction, maybe it does. We don't know.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
think there's kind of two questions I think that we have here. One is you're talking about on the user interface, having that nice checkbox or field to put in number of days, whatever. The other side of it, though, is just how it's designed on the back end when you get into the function calls, right? And I think, in the world of, hey, we know we're going to want to tweak replenishment, I think we're more in the function world, right? And I just
Right.
don't know it well enough to know, like, how modular is replenishment. My gut is that it's kind of a black box, and that if you modify it, you're essentially copying the code base, and that's where you're in danger for upgrades, right? Because if
Agree.
any of the
Absolutely
pieces
agree.
change, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
could it
Yeah.
be made more modular, maybe, where, like, you could tweak just a little piece of it, and
So here's an
it'd be easier to
alternative.
survive upgrades?
So
What's
here's
that?
an alternative that I would really like to see. If anybody at Acumatica listens, um, maybe the idea would be to say, hey, when you're dealing with automated replenishment, here are four options, four algorithms to pick from. Okay. Maybe make them per warehouse, whatever, who cares? But even if you had a couple of algorithms where you could say, hey, this looks at everything, or this one looks a week out, or this one does this, or this one does that. And it was literally just a click of a box and it would implement in this effect or instance, it's basically different type of BQuery or different BQuery string. But even at that would be incredibly powerful. And I could see that Acumatica being able to facilitate something like, excuse me, like that very, very easily. Um, so maybe those are some of the options that need to be considered, right? Likewise, same thing applies to MRP and advanced or planning and scheduling. I've only looked at that limited in a limited fashion, but there's that commonality of the system performs this algorithm like this, but I want it like that. And it's not terribly different. And there are well defined fences and yada yada yada. So in those applications or those modules, if they could say, look, this is the default algorithm that's utilized, but we have two other algorithms that you can utilize if they better suit your needs. Like that would be awesome. And I bet you that would, this is just me being delusionally optimistic, but I bet you, if they're answering the needs of 60%, maybe that gets them up to answering the needs of 80 or 90% of the users out there, right?
Yeah, I think the two of us are way too detail oriented to have that view, but maybe.
Dear.
I don't envy the role of product manager who has to
Oh, it's got to be
try to
tough.
find those numbers, right? Although they have
Yes.
nothing, yeah, they're guessing on the market.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I
So
do want to
on
ask
the
you.
flip side, well, I was going to say on the flip side, if I read my email correctly, I think I have actually been invited to participate in the next round of evaluations for the advanced planning and scheduling to talk about the algorithm because I have very specific needs for our scheduling and they're not rocket science and they're not weird. They're just the way we need it. So it's cool that they've actually responded back and said, yeah, you know what, we get to it, we'll include you. My only concern is that the original thread started 3 years ago, right? Um, so yeah, but anyway, we can be
Yeah,
optimistic.
it could be coming back around. Yeah, go listen to that. I wish I could remember the details right now, but Debbie provided some really good details on kind of where they're moving going forward on that.
Hmm.
Um,
Good.
I do want to also ask you, do you have another 10 minutes or so? How are you on time?
Yeah, 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 sure. I'm good.
I want to ask you about another approach that I've landed on for one client, and I wonder if it's an approach for others as well. I think you wind up in the build or tear down decision, right? I either tear down what's there to make it fit my needs, or I just build something from scratch. And I'm curious if you've entertained the idea of just writing a stored procedure in SQL and having that be your replenishment.
Absolutely. So, uh, it's funny you say in SQL. So I haven't figured out yet how to build a view or a stored procedure in SQL through um, uh, within Acumatica through their interface. I was actually a part of your one uh, session where you're talking. It's like, well, hey, we could just write the SQL code in this field and it gets stored, and Bob's your uncle. And I was really excited for that, right? And that it's like, yes, that almost gives me direct access. The flip side though is then you need to be able to trigger it. Now, alternatively, so this is where I go. I try to come up with solutions that have next to zero, ideally zero impact on the platform itself, and does all the number crunching and preparation elsewhere. Okay. So hypothetically, when there's an upgrade, there's no code. I'm not modifying anything. All I'm doing is expanding an endpoint, and I've got my own algorithm that I use. Okay. So only because this is more fresh in my head, uh, with the whole scheduling thing and MRP, there's a list of operations. Well, it's not actually a schedule. I thought it was. So that was my error. I thought that was actually the list of operations that would literally be executed based on the date, the whole kit and caboodle. So what I had done was I went in on I unlocked one field within those lists of operations, being the dates. And then I had an algorithm. So what would happen is you would say, okay, now make this order, make this production order, and it would go to our internal systems, push all the data in there, come up with all the answers, and then populate that new production order. Okay, this was all conceptual. I did it mechanically, if you will, through Excel and so forth, just to prove the concept. It can definitely work. Unfortunately, it's not going to work, and I'm not going to dive into that any further. But the idea is well, in the end, all you're looking to do is evaluate information and have a resulting document. That's really all this boils down to. So
Right.
I
You're keeping
could,
it segregated. You're keeping it
yeah,
outside of the core. Right. I got you.
yes,
Yep.
right. So what would happen was, never mind Acumatica, each night our SQL server, I've got a couple of servers that we run, doing different types of tasks. I would run one of these, a script on one of the servers that says, hey, go out, evaluate everything that needs to be replenished, because it's got all the logic, it uses all the same criteria, but only look out at orders that are like coming down the pipe within the next week. Okay, does the evaluation, here it all is, blah, 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 and actually then create a sales order of a transfer type and plop it in there. That's the way I would personally approach it with the skill sets that I have, right? I think you refer to it as non-intrusive. Um, and so that way, when it comes to updates, it's like there's really nothing to worry about. You check it to make sure maybe field names haven't changed, and all that kind of stuff, but you're really just extending an endpoint, which is easy enough. You can do that in real time. You don't have to reset anything. It doesn't require a customization if you don't want, whatever. So it's really easy peasy. And then you just code it all out in your favorite language. So I like PHP. Laugh if you want. I'm learning Python. Not a fan. Um, but it doesn't matter, because that's what I want. That's what I'm comfortable with. And the argument is so long as I use a language that somebody from our college could come on site, if I ever get splattered or quit or fire, whatever, if someone else can come in and look at it and it's well documented, then that's what counts, right?
So I
And
hear you on the
yeah,
API approach. Let me throw another idea at you. This is the one I landed on for this client. I think you're going to like it. But first, I have two questions. First one is, are you hosted yourself or are you in Acumatica SaaS cloud?
we're in the cloud.
Okay. So you don't have access to SQL. Second
Correct.
question is,
Drives me nuts.
uh, have you done anything with business events?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And have you attached business events to generic inquiries at all?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a whole bunch of that going on for a whole bunch of different reasons. So we have an
So
integration that I created, and just to clarify and set that in stone, what happens is when a customer enters a sales order, if it is, I've got custom fields on items that will trigger this. So if an item is used where a field is set to true, when they save the document, it hits a business event, it's a push notification, pushes out to our API that I've built. It schedules it within our scheduling system on-prem, okay, and then feeds back a unique identifier. And then on-prem, they're able to say, okay, so here's all my orders that are in the scheduling system. So I've kind of done my own little ISV thing, and really all I had to do is add a couple of fields and extend the endpoint. Um, So
Yeah. So
very comfortable.
you're
Yeah.
familiar with the business event. So
Yeah.
here's the idea that I've used before for replenishment one time,
Yeah.
but I think it worked well. There's a gotcha on it, but I don't think it's a gotcha for you. Here's the what we did.
I know where you're
First
going.
off, I worked with a developer to create a very lightweight product that I call Og SQL. I don't know if you've seen that on
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
site.
Yeah. I was there
And
for your rollout. Yeah.
yeah, so it's just one window where you can paste any SQL code you want and run it.
Yep.
So
Great
what you
idea.
can do is package up your replenishment logic into a stored procedure, and
Yep.
then you just have a simple SQL line that's execute the stored procedure.
Yep.
And originally, we were going to then build a scheduling mechanism into it, but eventually we realized that there's one already there because business events can run an import scenario that just launches the Og SQL screen, feeds it the execute stored procedure SQL logic, and sets it on a regular Acumatica schedule. Business events already know how to do that. So
Yeah.
we didn't have to
Right.
do that. It's already there. So you just create a business event that says go to the Og SQL screen, drop in this execute statement, and press the execute button. And then you can throw
Yeah.
it on a schedule so it runs automatically. So now you've got a
Right.
way to run your replenishment with the store procedure every night. So that
Yeah.
runs. Then what you'd want to do next is that data you want to populate in whatever tables you want it to populate in. You create your own tables, right? So we're still staying
Hmm.
outside of the core logic. Then you create the SQL view that looks at that custom table, and you expose it to the Acumatica customization project. So you get a DAC out of it. You then create a generic inquiry on top of that DAC. And now you've got the data that you need to feed to your transfer orders, right?
Yep.
So the only thing after that is you throw a business event on top of that generic inquiry that creates all the transfer orders for you.
Hmm. Yep. I get that. I'm very I love that kind of thinking. I love the mashup of all this kind of stuff. And I think you and I need to go out and have a virtual coffee sometime. Um,
Yeah, the only gotcha there is that you can't like change the vendor or the warehouse or whatever on the fly, which some people need. They need it part of the UI, but for you, it sounds like that's not an issue because it's running every night and the transfer
but that's
order
just
exists when
planning.
it's done.
That's just planning. And that's one of the things that I think would be really neat is like even during the evaluation of your replenishment, it's not committing anything. And I think that's one of the things I really like about this system is that it'll say, okay, well, these are the documents we propose. What do you want to do with them? Well, could I expose that proposal table through the endpoint if it's not already and let it do its thing and then simply tie something in to exclude those that are out of
Well,
scope?
in this
Or
case,
like there
though,
might be different ways of approaching this.
well, yeah,
Or
in this
or
case, you don't
populate
need
that
the
field
endpoint.
myself.
You don't need the
Yeah,
endpoint here.
I keep defaulting to I'm going to take that data, shove it out into my own system,
Right.
evaluate and shove it back, which could also work and would also give the people the opportunity to actually edit their own data. So imagine, I don't know if we could do this. I'm sure we could. Uh, you take the net result, shove it into an Excel file. Your user sits down, opens that one standardized Excel file. All the data has been replenished, and they go, yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, change this to that. Now submit that. And then as the new version of what's been proposed. And then initiate the automated creation of the sales orders and POs and all that kind of stuff. That might be a curious way to approach it.
Yeah, you could take that approach too. In that case, I don't even think you need the endpoints. In that case, you just use the regular O data, which I guess you could call an endpoint, to refresh your Excel file. And then you just suck
Yeah,
it back in with an
yeah,
import scenario, right?
yeah.
Um,
There you go.
I mean,
Even
that's
better.
all you would need there. And I find that you get very polarized uh, responses to that scenario. It's either I love it because I love Excel, or I hate it because that's the whole reason I bought an ERP system was to get rid of
Well,
these Excel
so
files.
look, so look. I am very big on using the right tool for the job. And what I deem to be the right tool may not be the same as what you deem to be the right tool. I'll tell you right now, on a personal level, I hate Excel. It's brutal. I don't know how anybody uses it. Okay. But that's because I'm used to a different world. I'm used to a world of SQL and databases and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Look, I get Excel's a powerful tool. But for some people, that's where they need to live. Just like I like PHP and not Python. Well, we're
Yeah,
lucky. We're so
it's an
lucky that we
audience.
have it.
Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
totally
We
the
have an
audience.
opportunity to leverage the tools we choose. Right. That's awesome. So
No, I agree. It's great to have options, right? And that's what I do like about the Acumatica approach. Again, going back to that, giving you tools rather than just giving you a solution. You have the option to use you approach it the way you want to approach it.
yeah, yeah, that's powerful. And so I think what I'd like to do is end off in terms of Acumatica that, yeah, it would be nice if they would run out and solve all of our problems and make everybody's lives happier. But I noticed in the last few revisions, if I interpret it correctly, and I think I've experienced this, is that the whole customization process has vastly improved. And quite frankly, that's what was exciting me about this solution, anyways. And if they put more energy into continually improving that, maybe add a couple of defaults, like I said, the idea of saying, well, here's 3 algorithms to pick from with whatever it is you're doing. I think that would be beneficial. But if they spent even more time making their UI more stable, more predictable, more functional, like it's already pretty awesome. I've experienced the improvements myself over the last few major upgrades. Um, but if personally, that's where I would spend my time, making it more accessible. You're not jeopardizing or threatening the existing marketplace. You're simply making more people happy. If they need a big solution, they still go to the marketplace. But for those small things that can be quite problematic, then now they're more accessible and it's safer. I think that would be a wise place for them to spend their time.
So I think we've landed on a number of ideas out there. And for anyone who's struggling with replenishment, feel free to jump in on the forum post that will be linked to on this episode page, and chime in with your thoughts. I think we've covered the breadth of it. I think still for
Yeah,
your situation, it sounds like you haven't landed on where you go in terms of depth. Which route you go,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I think
That's
we
okay.
covered the breadth of it, and I think these are the pieces that are, I think, helpful to understand when you're trying to
Well,
fit that replenishment shoe on your foot, right?
yeah. So if it's okay, I'd like to throw this out to the entire group that's listening. Um, some of this may be obvious, maybe not. Never be afraid to comment on something. Never be afraid that your question or your idea is silly. It might take 20 silly answers or responses to find the one that actually counts and is applicable. So you have served a purpose. Even if people don't like your idea, it still helps stir. I'm very big about stirring the pot. Put your product in the big pot of soup and let that person stir it up, and they will make of it what they will. And everybody that inputs, no matter what you think of it, it's all valuable. And yeah, I just really like that whole nurturing inclusion. Let's all stir these pots together and come up with better answers. And what works for me might not work for you, but maybe someone else, one of those ideas that may have been identified as being silly, maybe it's knocking it out of the park for you, right? So yeah, I just love the collaboration and throwing all those ideas around. Anyway, enough of me.
Great points. No, that and thanks for being willing to jump on your first podcast and stir the pot in this way.
There
Appreciate it.
you go. Absolute pleasure being here. It's been great finally getting to meet you. I've watched you a few times, and we've interacted online, so it's great meeting you finally. And I absolutely look forward to more interactions. This is all exciting stuff.
Well, thanks for coming on, and maybe we can revisit it again in a few months or so when you land on a solution that works for you.
Sure, I'll keep you posted.
All right, well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of ogforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.